All right, we're back here on Capital Conversations, and I'm pleased now to be joined by DFL Representative Alice Hausman, and she, I believe, is in her 12th term.
Well, 1990 was my first year.
Right,
I don't know what
right.
term that is.
I think you're in your 12th term, yeah. And you represent St. Paul and parts of
Falcon Heights.
Falcon Heights, that's right. And we're also joined by former legislator Paul Gardner, who's our regular political analyst and guest here on the program.
Irregular.
Well, and also Mitch Berg from AM 1280 The Patriot. He's a conservative radio commentator. He also blogs at shotinthedart.info.
And soon to be former Alice Hausman constituent, so you're going to go round and round.
Yeah, because you de-district.
That's right.
Mitch.
Just across the street now.
He's disappointed about that. Let's first thing I want to talk about now, just before we get started with the political talk, for Paul Gardner and you, Alice Hausman, is the passing of Larry Haas,
Yes.
the former state legislator who was here. Memories of Larry? He passed away last week. He lost a long battle with brain cancer, but. Can you talk about your memories?
Well, I told his family that I feel that his laughter is still echoing through the halls of the Capitol. He had a laugh that just made everyone else join him in that laughter. A sense of humor, certainly devoted to his area and to natural resources and equity in state funding for those natural resources. But I think what we remember is that spirit, and it was always with a sense of humor and always with laughter.
Paul, what are your memories?
Yeah, Larry Haas actually sat directly behind me on the floor for 2 years, along with Larry Haas, not to be confused with Larry
I know, that
Haas.
was very confusing.
We had three Larrys, but Larry Haas had been a longtime Parks Director in St. Cloud, Stearns County Commissioner. He was well known in the community. He and Steve Gottwald, who's a conservative Republican, and Larry Haas is a Democrat. They could get along and do things for their community together. Steve had some very nice things to say about Larry Haas, but he I'm kind of a wisecracker, but Larry was even better at it, and debate sometimes would drone on and on and on here in the middle of the night, and he would just concoct some wisecrack to people who were just getting too bloviated, you know, and just you could chuckle. And then occasionally he would get up on the floor and just say to somebody, you know, if you don't really have anything to contribute to this, I'd really suggest that you just sit down and let somebody else talk. But he could do it in a very nice way, and he's you know, we should all be remembered and missed as when we go as Larry Haas, and his services next week. I'm looking forward to going and meeting his family.
And of course, my good friend King Banyan replaced Representative Haas in that seat, and has always had great things to say about him, which you don't always hear across the aisle in this chamber. But he always said he's a great guy, all things considered. So
yeah,
he was one person who could separate the
personal from
the personal from the political.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
People could fight him one time and say, "Oh, Larry, let's have that beer you were talking about." So.
Well, it occurs to me that Larry Haas got here the old-fashioned way. He spent 32 years in public service in his local community, and then finally was elevated as a representative.
And he was a coach.
Community.
I think he was a wrestling coach. I think, among other things.
He did a lot of things.
For whatever reason, we have a lot of wrestling coaches that end up in the legislature.
And
but he was very well known among in the sporting community too.
One night, it was about 3:30 in the morning, and I used to sit right back in that alcove where the press is relegated, their little corner. And Larry swung around on the swivel chair and said to me, "You know, the longer politicians spend in one room together, the worse it is for the public good." And then he laughed, and we laughed together. We knew, you know, exactly what he was talking about. But he was that way. He was always like cracked a joke, and he was good, and he'll be missed. So thank you for your reflections about Larry, absolutely. And Representative
You
Haas.
always were lurking in that corner right behind us there.
That's where I would lurk.
Yes.
Yeah, that's exactly. But definitely good memories of Representative Haas. Okay, so now to the political stuff. Representative Hausman, I wanted to ask you about how does a bonding bill translate into jobs, and how do we quantify that?
Well,
how does the public?
I start from the perspective of what what infrastructure has to be in place in order for the economy to thrive. And that's higher education buildings, laboratories, classrooms, et cetera, where we train the workforce of the future.
Okay.
Wastewater infrastructure that allows, for example, in a town like Litchfield, a dairy company to expand if the wastewater system isn't big enough, or Wilmer. Transportation that gets products to market and people to work. And
so that means good roads. And
right.
Yep.
And so if we're doing it right, we should ask what infrastructure has to be in place in order for the economy to thrive, in order for the economy to be healthy. That's why you do it. Now, a side benefit, not the reason you do it, but a side benefit is it puts some people to work while those projects are being built. Architects, engineers,
Sure.
tradespeople of various sorts. So I think the jobs impact comes from two perspectives.
Thoughts on that, Paul Gardner?
You know, I was a little bit of a gentle critic of how capital investment decisions get made in the Capitol, not because of the way that Representative Hausman did it. She was actually very thoughtful and fair, and went about the process of bringing people to the projects around to the state to see them. But it's when other political considerations sort of inject themselves, usually in the other chamber, that tend to make it run off a little bit. So there are some things where it's clear a certain number of dollars go into wastewater treatment.
Yeah, what sort of
Okay, well, I mean, this works in both
Let's
parties.
name names.
Both
Come
parties
on
have
now.
done it, and rural districts have tended to see the capital investment bill as the first place to look for money. Areas with a larger tax base than the Twin Cities probably haven't done quite as much. So, you know, my district never had any requests except for one. And so Democrats and Republicans tend to say we're sending money outside our area, so we kind of would like to know what you're using it for and have some metrics to say here's how they compare. And Chair Hausman actually gave me a hearing on a bill I had for that, and Representative Downey and Representative Senator Anderson had similar ones, and rural legislators of both parties raked us over pretty good, saying let us fight for our areas and defend them to the voters. And my response was, well, I have to defend your projects to my voters if I have to do it.
And you know, he comes from that suburban perspective, and Ann Linczewski would agree with him that it is very often their feeling, those who represent suburban areas, that it's their taxpayers who fund this infrastructure for all the rest of the state. And so you hear much more criticism. And so I think that's why you have to look at things like the transit corridors in the suburban areas, the metro parks in the suburban areas, the MnSCU institutions in the suburban areas, to make certain that there is some equity for those taxpayers who have felt for a long time that they sort of pay the bill for the rest of the state.
It's also important to distinguish. We know that if you put a certain amount of money into construction, certain things will happen.
Yeah.
The question is what projects may give you more bang for the buck, and how soon can the money be released? I think that's always an issue with bonding, is that it takes at least 6 months, I think, for money to actually flow to get contracts signed.
Well, let's hear from our conservative here. Mitch, what do you think?
Well, you know, my comments aren't so much about the bill itself. I mean, bonding is a perfectly legitimate.
Which bill? There's a couple. The
Dayton bill in particular was the one that the Dayton, the GERBS plan that he was putting out earlier in the session here, which had made some absurd claims for the numbers of jobs it was going to create. I ran the math on it.
Did you just say absurd?
Absurd.
Absurd.
Ludicrous. Risible.
Right. All right. So, okay, right. You didn't like it.
I mean, basically, if you broke down the number of the numbers in the Dayton's jobs plan, it basically would pay $36,000 a year per employee if you accepted his funding levels and the number of jobs he claimed he's going to create. That's $3,000 a month, not counting things like insurance, like capitalized expenses, like shovels for all those shovel-ready jobs. I mean, we're talking the politics behind the Dayton version of the GERBS plan and the bonding bill just don't add up. They're ludicrous.
And I have to tell you, a great fun I had when I heard Michelle Bachmann talk about the Stillwater Bridge, because that was her GERBS plan. And after they announced in Washington that it had been passed, she too promised an absurd number of jobs She was going to deliver. She went to Washington. Michelle Bachmann, this fiscal conservative, went to Washington, got all this money, more money than we've ever spent on a bridge, and she came back and she promised Minnesota that it would be an enormous number of jobs.
Okay, well, so we have offsetting penalties. It's still a bad idea to claim absurd numbers of jobs for the amount of money that's out there. By the way, feel free to go out to Stillwater and make that case there, Representative Hausman.
Well, one thing I want to ask, though, is...
You two know each other, right?
Have been asking this for a long time. Where's the quantifiable metrics on how we figure out what percentage of the tax dollar invested in bonding translates into actual jobs? I mean, I asked Speaker Kelleher when she was here. I've asked, Zeller. Nobody seems to know if there's a formula for that.
There isn't a formula, and first of all, I wouldn't say that you. I try not to call the bonding bill a jobs bill.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think you do it for jobs. You do it for infrastructure that has to be in place. That's why you do it, and that's what you measure. Every entity has a different formula. University of Minnesota has a formula. MnSCU has a formula. Wetlands restoration has a formula. Bowser does. So everyone has a different metric, and that's why
but not for jobs, but just
yes, for jobs.
Oh, for jobs. Okay.
Bowser says for every million, there's this many jobs. So everybody has a different formula.
Who's Bowser?
Board of Water and Soil Resources.
Oh,
they restore wetlands.
Thank you.
The guy from Shanana.
And so everybody, everybody's got a different formula, and it's why I don't ever make a broad claim, because everybody's metric, everybody's formula is different.
In 2010, when jobs really had dropped off, I always looked at it, how much money would be infused in the economy, because I think we're demand-siders here, that if you infuse any money into the economy that way, it will get spent on the basics: food, clothing, transportation, housing.
Yeah, it's going to go back into the economy, in your theory.
Right, but I also had the same question, which is, what is the formula? Shouldn't everybody applying for those funds let us know ahead of time when they make their application? And those are all available publicly, but all the proposals look different.
Yeah, and
so
are
if you
they
had
a
table where you could look at it and compare them, there would be some transparency, so people in the media and online could say, this one makes sense and this one is full of it.
And Minnesota State colleges and universities would even say in their funding they have two different formulas. Asset preservation has one set of numbers, a new building has another. What MnSCU often said is asset preservation sometimes serves to keep their current employees ongoing with asset preservation. So it doesn't mean they might bring in a whole construction crew, but this crew goes around and repairs the roof and repairs something else in another building, so it might be more ongoing. New construction, where they're constructing a laboratory that's very sophisticated, has a whole different kind of demand.
Yeah, I remember this came up, Mitch, when they were having the debate about bonding and jobs one year up here. And the question was, well, why can't we make sure they're Minnesota jobs? And I think Representative Hausman, you stood and said, my recollection may be poor on this, but I paraphrase, not all jobs are that easy to do, that we expect every resource to do a thing here in the state.
But I will say, Minnesota has been responsible about this. When we arrived in Duluth to look at their convention center to see the progress, the gentleman there handed us a list, and he showed us where all the subcontracts had been let for that building. And with two exceptions, all the subcontracts were in the state of Minnesota, all over the state. And he wanted to demonstrate to us that as we invested in them, they in turn invested in the state. The only two exceptions were one in Superior, Wisconsin, across the water from them.
Can't there just be one law against cheeseheads? I mean, just keep them out altogether.
And the other one was, I think, a firm in
Don't build
Michigan.
That bridge, then.
A firm in Michigan that had a particular stadium seat that might have been only available there.
Oh,
but before
the type of stadium seat for that.
Before we leave bonding, I think it's important to talk about this year and how it's going to get done, because as much as we make fun of it, I will tell you the state of Minnesota expects it. there are a number of projects that they are desperate for, wastewater infrastructure and transportation particularly.
Okay.
And in the special session, there was a model that we followed that I long to follow again. In the special session, the governor, the House, the Senate, Republicans and Democrats all worked together. I was the only House Democrat invited to be in a room to write a bill, and it's because in a bonding bill, they need a supermajority, so they need our votes. So everyone worked together. We sat in a room, we wrote the bill together. When it was done, it was a bill we all coalesced around on a bipartisan basis. It had a strong bipartisan vote. It passed identically in the House and the Senate, was sent to the governor and signed. When I tell that story to audiences, they look at me in shock and they say, why didn't we read about this in the newspaper? That's what Minnesotans expect of us. They wish that's how we worked all the time, that we always came together across all those boundaries, worked together to have a good outcome. And
Mitch, if that happened, you wouldn't even have a radio show.
Yeah, and I will ride away on a unicorn after that happens. So that sounds like fun to me.
It's not bad for Representative Hausman to hope for that.
But I have been lobbying. I've been lobbying everyone out in the hall who cares. In the last 2 weeks, I've said that is the only way we get one this year.
Okay.
Right now, I've asked everyone who cares. I've said go to Senator Senjum and Representative Zellers and say that's how we want it done this year. Let's work together. No, none of this bonding dance. We don't have time for it, and we just have to work together.
Mitch?
We'll see.
Okay, let's move on. Okay, bonding, yeah, that's important. It doesn't appear right now like we're heading in the right direction on that.
I'm a little nervous.
You're a little nervous, all right. Last time you told me that, we didn't get something, so let's talk a little bit about what we started off the session, and all of the leadership said jobs, 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 and the governor was wedged between them. So he was there. Jobs, 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 number one focus. So far we've seen amendments for fireworks, Sunday liquor sales, renaming the state dirt, all kinds of constitutional amendments, right to work, all this stuff. When are we going to get to jobs? And is it the government's role to sort of help create jobs? When I ask the Republicans, they say, do you mean the DFL plan to create jobs? Because that's no plan. And then when I ask the DFL, they say, well, Republicans just want to enrich businesses and don't care about the people who actually have to go to work. So, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but Mitch, you
well,
look like
you're
you
right,
want to say
Marty. No strange off-topic and tangential bills have ever been debated in the legislature before. This is a first, right?
Well, I'm not saying so, but I'm just saying
it is a record,
if jobs
I
is
would
your
say.
promise.
I don't think we've ever had quite so much of a concentration on bizarre stuff for so long without getting to the real stuff.
2 words for you, Phyllis Kahn, okay? I mean, let's be honest here. Let's go back 15, 20 years here, and you could write a book about, and not to pick on Phyllis Kahn, she's a lovely person, I've met her a few times. More than I have you, actually, my erstwhile Representative Hausman. You know, the Republicans,
You
have...
haven't met her very many times. You can't just take shots at her.
I'm not taking shots, I'm just pointing out that this is the first time I've actually met her in person in 20-odd years of living in her district, just saying.
See, that's a shot, Mitch. That's a characteristic.
No, it's a statement of fact. We haven't met. Nice to meet you, by the way.
I'll
think
let
it's
Alice
a keep
defend
out
herself.
sign you have on your
I think Jay Beninoff may have warned her at one point that my particular stop was not a friendly one. Well, it's a friendly one.
Well, Marty, you know, I think people over this Easter Passover break are going to start taking stock to see if the benefit of staying here any longer, whether it's for jobs or anything else, is worth the benefits that might result. And I think
do you
the
mean
only
Minnesotans in general or businesses?
Well, I think legislators, I think people in the majority caucuses in particular are everybody's going to be staying up here talking about trapping and fishing and now voter ID tonight, so there's going to be a lot of aggravation right up to the end on Thursday. And then people are going to relax for a little bit, talk to their activists, and then see what they actually are going to be able to talk about when the session is over.
Is that right, Mitch? Is that what we can expect?
I'm sure it's what we can expect. I mean, throughout the session, the Republicans have been focusing on creating private sector jobs, which government doesn't directly do, working on doing it indirectly by cutting regulations, getting government off the back of small business. The Democrats seem to think, at least in the alternative media, can't speak to everyone in the legislature, but in the left-leaning media that covers the legislature, seems to be the only job that counts is one that's created by government and paid with the state of Minnesota paycheck. Two fundamentally different versions of what a job is in play here.
And I think there's probably no evidence that just cutting regulation is a job producer. Before the session started, the governor had a jobs summit.
Yeah,
and
hang on a
it
second,
was a broad
Hausman.
it was a broad.
Did you say cut regulations?
Right. Cutting regulations, cutting business taxes.
They just signed a bill this week, right, to eliminate some of the red tape?
Yeah,
we did last year. Last year it was House File 1, and we did another one this year.
And it's a bit of a straw man,
and
Representative
actually,
Hausman, because no one says that
that was a bipartisan one. The governor has signed both of those.
Right. Well, that's good, and it's a good start. And by the way, just a bit of a straw man there. No one says that deregulation itself creates all the jobs all by itself with no other impetus whatsoever. Just so we're clear on that.
So I think it's important for us to look at what there is agreement around. The Jobs Summit had a broad cross-section of speakers. I was there all day. I listened to all the speakers all day.
Who was there? Republicans, Democrats?
Everybody. There was just a broad cross-section in attendance and also in speakers. I listened and listened and listened because there's a huge debate. Can government do anything to create jobs? So I was curious, will there be any agreement? There was agreement about two things. Government can create a world-class education system from early childhood to higher education. That is absolutely something government can do, and it leads us to a healthier economy. And the other is building infrastructure. Individuals can't do that by themselves. They can't build a transportation system by themselves. That's something that government coming together has to do. So, a world-class system of education and infrastructure.
Any arguments?
No argument about no argument about either one. Honestly, Representative Hausman, I think the whole question of is our government doing a world-class or even state-class job of providing an education is a whole nother episode of the Marty Owings show here. But no disagreement here.
I think we cut off.
I would just say, one failing in the legislature is that everything is done in 2- and 4-year segments. So it's often very hard for people to look at the long term, to look at the things that Minnesota's done very well by, that you can't pinpoint in a brochure and say that created jobs. It is an overall sense of things that takes place over time. One thing I think would be helpful for most voters, if people want to come up with metrics for saying how many jobs you're going to create with government borrowing or spending, the question is also, when I was on the tax committee, what happens if you reduce the statewide business property tax or decrease this regulation? How can you estimate the ripple impact of that? Because if it turns out that was really positive, then people would do more of it. And instead, we usually get the arguments over demand versus supply side, or one thing or another. So those of us are relatively centrist suburban folks are always interested
Swing
in
district?
Data. Man, give us some data. Right.
Right. No? Nothing on that? Okay, I'm astounded.
I shall remain silent.
All
I used my Jedi mind tricks on him.
I see that you did that. You were very clever at it.
This is not the argument I want.
Right. You did that to Emmer and Biskins once, and it was Twitter. We don't want to talk about that.
Meet me outside, Marty.
No, I don't even want to talk about that one. You have 5 minutes? Okay, thank you. All right, we have 5 minutes left. There's a couple other quick-hitting topics I want to talk to you guys. Amendment. Will we see any more amendments? Does it make any political sense to introduce any more amendments? Right to work, any others?
Let me pose this. I mean, a lot of people in the majority party are going back to their endorsing conventions in the last couple of weeks. I would be curious to see if a lot of conservatives are saying, why didn't you put other stuff on there, or cut more spending, or do other stuff, and whether that is having an impact on whether we'd see anything. We should talk about how these conventions are going with redistricting, because that's where I've spent a lot of time in the last couple of weeks.
Have you been lurking?
No, I just seeing what people are talking about on the DFL side and seeing how that plays out.
Oh, I've been to a few myself, and people are saying we want all three of the big amendments to go through, and we want the spending cuts and the regulation cuts. And by the way, why don't you slash the business taxes? I mean, the Tea Party set some expectations relatively high over the last 2 years here, and you go onto the Republican side of the caucus trail and the convention trail. It hasn't changed a whole lot.
So,
I think right to work won't happen. Obviously, the marriage amendment is already on, and the photo ID we're doing tonight. What's fascinating about the marriage amendment is that's where the younger generation shows us that across the ideological spectrum, whether you're Republican or Democrat, conservative or progressive, a high school page was in my office a couple of weeks ago. He's from my district, and we usually talk at some point to see how their experience is going. And I said, well, people are here from all over the state. Have you debated issues? He said, yes, we have, but there's one around which we have 100% agreement, and that is the marriage amendment. He said, our generation is way beyond that. And we think the reason they want to write it into the Constitution is they know we're coming. We're the future leaders. They know we're coming. And if it were just a law, we could change it, but if it's in the Constitution, it'll be harder for us. So, I mean, here was a young man who had just spent a week with Republicans and Democrats, Greater Minnesota and Metro, and he was telling me, our generation is different.
Well, Lawrence poll, put it this way, marriage amendment is not something I'm particularly hot and bothered about myself, but a Lawrence poll last year showed that, in fact, that Tom Emmer may have left as many as between 3 and 4 points on the table by not hitting on the marriage amendment hard. So young people's sentiments notwithstanding, clearly there's some numbers out there strongly in favor of the marriage amendment, whether you agree with it or not.
Well, if we've seen, Paul Gardner, the end of amendments for this session, why? What's the political calculus?
Well, I don't think the right to work amendment could pass, to be quite honest.
But there are other amendments too, supermajority.
You know, I think a lot of Republican legislators who have been here a long time, including a lot of the folks in the House who have actually been in charge before, understand the risks of some of these things. They've seen what's happened in Wisconsin, where a progressive base has gotten fired up. I know the progressive base did not show up in 2010, and I also think a lot of them are responsible enough to say, you know, I'm not stupid. I think I can decide on these things too. I don't need to put it on the ballot. So I'll give some credit to my Republican colleagues for knowing that, and I think we'll beat the other two.
Well, I'm going to put you on the spot for this last question. Mitch, let's give out some grades to the legislature and the governor. Okay, A, B, C, D, F. What grade do you give the legislature and why?
I give the legislature a C. I think they swing way too low. I think that the leadership in both chambers for the majority has been utterly pusillanimous in the face of a labor threat that is spread way too thin to fight right to work. I think they caved on that way too fast.
We're going to be contributing to the big word jar when we're done with this, because I have no, what's pusillanimous?
You just put it on my account, Marty, because we aren't even started here yet.
All right, sounds good.
I did like Representative Hackbarth today on the venison donation thing, using the word ingenuous.
Ingenuous?
He meant to say disingenuous, you know, to be duplicitous, but he said, that's very ingenuous.
We got way too many syllables rolling here.
It's too late.
Representative Hausman, what grade do you give the legislature?
Well, since we haven't finished the term, I'm still giving everyone a little bit of a chance. We can't give the final grade until we see what happens. We only had to accomplish one thing this year. That's the bonding bill. If we have no bonding bill, then we have failed. And if we have a bonding bill, then I have to see the contents before I know whether it's an A, B, or C.
This is what's called a pivot in the political you pivoted on this one, but you're not going to give yourself a grade. Okay, Governor.
F minus.
Paul.
Maybe a G.
I don't want to go to grades, but I think the governor's done well in that he said what he thinks.
Are you
well, I'll give him an A, sure.
Oh, really?
Well, you're
F and an A. All right.
I think that no, he's been fairly frank about what he wants to do. He said about with his commissioners to get things done, and I think that people enjoy that genuineness. Is another big word.
Not the ingenuousness.
No.
And everything we've heard from everybody that I've heard from since he was elected is that achievement and outcomes are much better than anyone had anticipated.
Okay. Well, that's all we have time for tonight, but I want to thank our
Can we
guests
grade you?
tonight. Well, my wife does that regularly when I get home and through other, but you're certainly welcome to call her and contribute to my 360, they call it, don't they? Feedback. I'd like to thank our guests tonight. Earlier tonight we had Senators Dave Senjum and Terry Bonhoeff, and of course Representative Alice Hausman's joined us. Our good friend and favorite political analyst Paul Gardner, and of course our favorite regular conservative contributor Mitch Berg.
And in my heart, you're always a B-, Marty.
I appreciate that. At
He
least
doesn't
it's
give anyone
slightly
an A, I
above
don't
average.
think, so it's pretty good.
That's not too bad. But thank you guys, and I hope to have you back soon. Well, as we wrap up the session,
It was good
we'll
to
do
be
a
with
little
you.
analysis.
Thanks, Marty.
Thank
Thank
you
you very much.
Thank you both. Also, don't forget to tune in live next week when former Governor Arnie Carlson will be our special guest. He'll give us the scoop on all things political up here
Aw,
at the
man.
Capitol from his point of
We
view.
missed that?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I asked him if he wanted
Have
other
Paul
guests.
back.
I asked him
Paul
if he
back.
wanted other guests, and he said, "Not from
No.
that place."
And maybe
Yeah.
in the studio audience.
The studio audience. And don't forget to go to mncapitalnews.com and cast your vote on voter ID early. We've got an open poll there where you can cast a vote. And go ahead and register your thoughts there. We had production assistance tonight from Susan Miracle and Connor Malloy. Our associate producers were Matt Ealing and Catherine Loudenslager. I'm Marty Owings. We'll see you at the Capitol. Good night, everybody.